life was spared. Think of what it did for Samson and for Barak and for Jephthah and for the prophets and for Elijah, who called fire down from heaven and God responded. Think of it. Sometimes faith changes our circumstances. That's the first fact of faith. Sometimes, because of faith, God does great miracles and great wonders. And that's the way it is today. Sometimes in response to healing, and I hadn't intended to say this, but Jackie, you're sitting right here. I'm reminded of the great healing that you experienced. This lady was given up for dead, and we prayed, and here she is with us. Sometimes in response to faith, God changes circumstances. People are healed. Money comes to us unexpectedly when we need it. We are kept from accidents. God miraculously enables us to get through life. And that which we expected to be a great disappointment actually turns out to be a blessing. All because of faith. Because sometimes faith does change our circumstances. But there's a second fact of faith, and that is, I suppose, the most startling and the important one. Sometimes faith does not change our circumstances. It doesn't change our circumstances. You know, as a boy, I memorized a lot of Scripture. I memorized the entire book of Hebrews, all 13 chapters. Just in case you're wondering, it takes 45 minutes to recite the book of Hebrews. But just don't you dare ask me to do it this afternoon. Because that was done many, many years ago when my mind was a lot keener, when I had a photographic memory. Now my memory seems to be always working in the dark. And what is more, it hasn't developed anything. I'm like a camera. I remember my wife and I, we were in China. She was shooting pictures all over the place and then discovered that there was no film in the camera. But back then, when I memorized the entire book of Hebrews, it didn't dawn on me, as it has since that time, that the author now switches. The middle of verse 35 is a big what's the word I want? I want to say transmission, but obviously it's something else. Somebody help me, Darrell. What word do I want? Transition. That's the word I wanted. See, that's what happens when you get older. You need people behind you to be teleprompters to tell you what to say. In fact, my wife tells everybody, she says, of course I'm busy. I prepare all of his messages. All right, back to the text. Transition. Middle of verse 35. And others. A whole new category of people who had faith but did not see deliverance. And others were tortured, not accepting their release in order that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And I might add, there was for them no deliverance. No deliverance. Many commentators believe that the description that is given here might refer to the time of the Maccabees. That is a time before Jesus Christ appeared on this world. Remember Antiochus Epiphanes? He was going to go into Egypt and he was rebuffed. He wasn't able to do that, and he came back to Jerusalem in anger. He surrounded the city. He took men, women, and children, and he massacred them. It was bloody. It was gory. It was unspeakably cruel. He offered a sow on the altar there in the temple area in Jerusalem to the god Zeus, spiting the Jews, insulting them. In fact, Eleazar was the high priest at that time. And you know what Antiochus did is he had Eleazar's skin taken off, and then the man was tortured until he died. In fact, he had 7 sons, and I'd like to describe very briefly how those sons were tortured and how they died. The first was taken and tied onto the wheel of a chariot, so that as the horses ran, the body would twirl like that until he died. The second was tortured with spikes. The third, his arms and his legs were dismembered. The fourth had his tongue cut off before he was tortured. The fifth was also put on the wheel of a chariot. The sixth was thrown into a huge frying pan, and the seventh was thrown into the fire. Some of you may even say that it was poor taste for me to mention such gory things on a beautiful Sunday morning. But you know why I tell you that story? Because I want to ask you something. Where was God when all that was happening?
Well, yes, my friend, where was God? I hope that you tune in again tomorrow for the rest of this message, because it's very important for us to understand that there are times when God is silent. But just because he's silent, that does not mean that he is indifferent. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Lutzer. Erwin Lutzer has brought part 1 of When God Doesn't Come Through, the final message in his series on Highlights from Hebrews. Running to Win comes to you from the Moody Church in Chicago. We believe our series from Hebrews will help you draw near to God in fully assured faith. Highlights from Hebrews can be yours on CD as our thank you when you give a gift of any amount to support Running to Win. For details, call 1-800-215-5001. That's 1-800-215-5001. On the Internet, go to offerrtw.com. That's offerrtw, all one word, .com. Finally, you can write to Running to Win, Box 11-174, Chicago, Illinois, 60611. This is Dave McAllister. Our series from Hebrews continues on tomorrow's Running to Win.